My guest today is Andrew Plato, an experienced CEO, founder, author, and cybersecurity expert. In 1995, Andrew founded Anitian, one of the earliest cybersecurity companies on record, where he pioneered innovations in intrusion detection, endpoint security, and cloud security. He led the development of a revolutionary automated platform for secure cloud environments, and under his leadership, Anitian formed strategic partnerships with major tech companies like AWS, Microsoft, and Trend Micro before he exited the company in 2022. Andrew leads Zenaciti, providing business and security intelligence, and recently founded Screenopolis, focusing on media analysis. He's also the author of the Founder's User Manual, Practical Strategies for the Startup Leader. Thank you so much for being with us on the show today, Andrew. It's a real honor to have you here.
Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate the opportunity to be here as well.
Awesome. So you have quite a history in cybersecurity, as I alluded to in the intro. You were doing it before I think it even had the name cybersecurity, and they just called it QA or something like that. I most certainly want to dive into that. But before that, I'm just curious, how did you initially get interested in computers, and how did that sort of evolve into an interest in security?
So my interest in computers actually dates back to college. I used to get on BBSs, if you can remember that, dial-up BBSs, and I'd write on these. There's a number of them that I got on when I was in college in Tucson, Arizona, and I met a lot of other weird people that way. But it became an opportunity, an outlet to write and be creative and interact with other weirdos. But that got me into computers, and then when I got out of college, I moved to Seattle because I wanted to be in the computer industry, and got a job at Microsoft eventually. And that's what led to getting into security. It was at Microsoft that I got hacked into a website and didn't really understand quite what I had done, but I knew I'd done something interesting. Yeah. And that sort of then it took off from there. And part of it, I think, was the response of the developers that really got me interested, because when I showed them, because I'd executed this hack, what we now call SQL injection, which is kind of the granddaddy of all website hacks. And I was one of the first to execute it. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. But when I showed it to the developers, they were like, this is nothing. Nobody would think to do this. I'm like, I thought to do it. Who the heck am I?
Yeah, right. And yeah, you mentioned BBSs, which I think for our younger listeners, I just want to circle around on that because I think it's fascinating. So I actually got into computers a little after that. It was sort of the dawn of the instant messenger. So BBS was like the precursor to instant messenger. It stood for bulletin board system.
Right.
And I think what made it really neat that maybe people wouldn't get today is that the internet was done over the phone lines back then. And so your BBS community would all be local to you because long distance costs a lot of money. So you would have this online community, but they were actually close enough. You could probably drive and have a beer together on Friday or something like that.
Which I did. I mean, that was part of it. I mean, you were kind of building a community of these local nerds. And I mean, I was cool among the nerds because I had a 2400 baud modem, which... in 1989 was like, oh, wow, Andrew, you're the coolest guy in the world.
And like a whole 60 megabytes of RAM, I bet,
too. Ooh, yeah.
Awesome. And so, that was how you kind of got your nose into security. And then how did Anitian come about? What spawned that?
Yeah, so at Microsoft, after I did the whole attack and, the developers were dismissive, I got really into security. Like, I'm like, this is an issue. This is a problem. It was that why am I seeing something that other people are not seeing? What's the disconnect here? So I decided, I wanted to do security. There wasn't really anybody doing it. Microsoft certainly wasn't interested in it at that time. And so I went off and started my own company and to do security and called it Anitian. And at first, I, again, didn't really know what I was doing and had to learn a lot about networking and software development and, servers and all the things that are involved in security today. And, little by little, year over year, I learned how to do penetration testing. I learned how to set up firewalls and proxy servers and then intrusion detection systems. One of the early companies I got involved with was a company called Black Ice, which was run by a bunch of pioneers in security. And they built one of the first inline high-performance intrusion prevention systems, and that was a lot of fun. I got to learn a lot about network protocols and decoding protocols and what goes on between computers as they talk to each other. So Anitian then grew year over year, and I pivoted the company a number of times as the company grew, and I sold security products for many years, and then I did security consulting, penetration testing and compliance auditing services, and then ultimately I pivoted the company into a cloud security company. I built a cloud security platform, an automated platform for these high security regulated environments where you could very quickly and very rapidly deploy all the necessary tools and security controls.
Very cool.
Grew that company up and ultimately got investors and as you said, exited in 2022.
And you're currently the CEO of two new adventures, Zenaciti and Screenopolis. Can you give me a quick pitch of what each one of those is?
Yeah, so Zenaciti is a spinoff from Anitian. So I had a analysis and consulting practice that I focused on at Anitian, and I just spun that out into Zenaciti. And I do technical due diligence. So investors hire me, I come in and I look at a technology and I tell them what's good and what's bad. And I've been involved in some big billion-dollar acquisitions, including one that was really a riot to do. It was a lot of fun because the technology was kind of a mess. I won't say who it is, but it's always fun when you get in there and you're like, this is worth $2 billion?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So those are really fun projects. I really like doing those. And then I also do cybersecurity strategy. I've been working on managed security strategy a lot lately. I have a customer in that space. So that's my consulting company. And then Screenopolis is my fun company. So me and a bunch of other nerds got together. We like movies and TV shows. We like talking about them and we like quoting them. And we like, I'm a big Star Trek nerd, as it's pretty obvious. I got a bunch of Star Trek, toys back there. And so we just started a website and I hired a bunch of other writers, some really well-known writers. And we do reviews and analysis. I just wrote an article. I ranked the best war movies of the 1980s, which, spoiler alert, the best one I picked was Das Boot, which is a fantastic movie. I love that movie.
Maybe we'll link it in the show notes there. So that one's not so much a business as a passion project.
It's a business because underneath so there's all the fun stuff on the front end of writing reviews and talking about war movies or sci-fi or whatever. But under the covers, we're actually doing some really innovative stuff. We've built a whole API engine and then using AI to do a lot of what I would call grunt work on the website. So one of the key things it does is it actually summarizes movies. So we have an AI engine that goes out, looks up new movies, and then summarizes them, and then gathers up all the data about them and puts them into a database for us. And then we're also working on some other innovations. So there's stuff going on behind the scenes on the infrastructure side that's pretty fun.
Oh, very cool.
And I like doing that a lot, and got a great developer who I work with on that.
Oh, right on. That's super fun. And you mentioned Star Trek. I know we talked about that a little bit before leading up to this interview. Is Anitian in any way a tip of the hat to the sci-fi world there? The name has a certain ring to it.
No, the funny thing is Anitian's actually named after a cat.
Okay.
I had a cat in college named Anita.
Okay.
Great cat, by the way. She was awesome. And when it came time to name my company, I was trying to figure out a name for it. And I was thinking of that cat, and I was like, Anita, Anitian.
Yeah,
that's it. So the company's named after a cat.
No surprises there, because the internet is ultimately just cats, right?
Right. It's all cat means at this point.
Okay. Most recently, you wrote the book, The Founder's User Manual, which I think is going to be the crux of what we're talking about today. Can you, before we get into that, share the inspiration behind writing the Founder's User Manual and what experiences led you to decide to pick this up?
So I've been a writer my whole life. I do security. I'm a CEO. I'm a founder. Those are all true things. But really the thing I am is I'm a writer. It's the one skill and talent I have that I am truly, truly passionate about. So after I exited my company, I was going through the normal sort of ups and downs of founders, like, what am I going to do now? Kind of thing. And I was having dinner with another founder, another very successful founder. He's exited 3 or 4 companies at this point. And we were chatting about all the war stories we had when we were founders. And it was, a little bit of a contest, like, oh, yeah, well, I had an employee who did this. And, oh, yeah, well, I was running the company off my credit card.
Yeah.
And so, we were kind of having fun with that. And at one point, this founder said to me, he's like, you really should write a book about this. This is like great stuff. And I'm like, that's a good idea. You're right. I should. And as a writer, a challenge like that is just like, yeah, I'll take that on. So I just started writing it. And it was a lot of fun to write. It took a long time. It took well over a year to kind of get it all to a point that was readable. But it was that was the inspiration. It was that. And I think the other key thing is that I realized as I was writing it, or started writing it, how much sort of how many sort of good practices I had amassed over my decades of running a company. And it's like every time I catalog another one, I'm like, geez, I mean, like, there's so many of them. And I had that moment where I'm like, man, I really wish I had known this when I started my company. Like, if somebody had handed me this book when I was in my first year or 2 of starting my company, oh man, I could have avoided a lot of problems if I had just followed my own advice, you know? And so that became this sort of thing that sustained me, is this notion of there's a lot of really hard-learned lessons in this that I hope, and my intent is, will help other founders or leaders out there.
Yeah, and that's great advice for people getting started too, is to try and learn the lessons from other people, because I know we're all pretty stubborn and you're just going to have to end up learning a lot of them yourselves. But like, if you can, like, think back to all those things your parents told you that you didn't listen to, that in retrospect seem like, wow, I should have listened to them. It's the same kind of thing here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in your experience, what are the most common pitfalls that founders face in the early stages of their startup journey?
There's a lot of them. I will start with probably the most basic one I always hit on, which is you must always get paid. I know this sounds sort of like, well, duh, but I cannot impress upon founders more stringently that you must be paid for whatever the heck you're doing. You must make money. And you've got to, you can do all this amazing work, but if your customers are not paying you, or you're not collecting your invoices, you have a serious, serious business problem. And I know that seems like a duh kind of thing to say, but the thing about I've discovered a lot of founders is they tend to be extremely passionate, driven people. And they're not driven by money. They're not money-motivated people, usually. It's not that they dislike money or don't want to make it. It's just that's not their primary motivator. Their motivator is often to solve problems or fix something or do good for others. And so money becomes this kind of like, oh, yeah, whatever, we'll get to that. But you can't set it aside. And if you're not good with money, which I'm not particularly good with money, then hire a person who is. It's a basic principle. It's a principle that it's like, if I'm going to start anywhere, I'm like, are you getting paid? Are you collecting your invoices? Yes. Okay. Now we can move on to all the other problems. And there's a lot of them. Messaging, sales, knowing how to sell, knowing how to engage with customers, knowing how to build a product that people actually want. There's the litany of problems you face as a founder are tough. Another one that I think a lot of founders fall into is the self-reflection trap. They don't stop and sort of look back at themselves and say, what am I doing right and wrong? How can I improve? And that's another thing that I discovered when I went for a long time running a company poorly. And when I got a CEO coach and joined the CEO coaching group, I discovered that the key, the unlocking sort of key for a small startup to get to the next level is not, do you have a great product? Are you running on a great platform? Do you have some amazing innovative technology? Those are all important, legitimately, but the real key to it all is yourself, your own leadership skills. That if you work on your own ability to lead and grow and manage and all the other skills of leadership, your company will naturally grow. Mm-hmm. And a lot of founders don't do that. They don't focus on themselves. They try to, they get so into the product, or they get so into the other dimensions of it that they don't think about, wait a minute, I need to make myself better, and I need to improve myself in order to make my company better. Because in the early days, the founder is the company and the company is the founder. The two of you are connected like this. And it's only until much later, as you scale and grow, do you start to then be able to pull apart from the founder and the company being almost one and the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always say that to early stage folks, is that like in the beginning, you are the brand.
Right.
You're the whole face of the company. And yeah, those great advice.
And if you have problems, then your company has problems.
Right. So one of the themes you address is the relationship between founders and their team. I think you just kind of touched on it a little. How can founders balance their personal involvement while empowering their team to do the work when they're not there?
Yeah, that comes from a section of my book. I called it The Unintentional Consequences of Being Friendly to Employees, which is a ludicrously long name for a simple idea. But I am a writer, right? I like to state things in crazy ways sometimes. I think one of the bigger challenges for a lot of founders is this relationship you have with your team. It's a difficult relationship to manage. I think the first thing I'd say is important thing to understand is that when you are a CEO or founder, you are the CEO all the time. It doesn't matter whether you're at work, after work, on the phone, nighttime, daytime, you are always the leader. You are always in charge. And so that fundamentally changes your relationship with the people around you. You are their boss, whether you're at work or off having fun. So you have to set some boundaries, and you have to always keep the focus on them and on the company and on the goals and the mission of the company. It cannot be about you. And a lot of founders struggle with this because they have the very human need for validation. You want to get people telling you you're right and you're smart and, aren't you a great guy? That's not a weird thing to want. We all want that.
Yeah.
The problem is when you're a founder, when you're a CEO, when you're in a leadership role, you're not going to get it. And you're certainly never going to get it from your employees because that's not their job. Their job is not to make you feel better. If you need to feel better, if you need validation, get a counselor, get a CEO coach, get a dog, or a cat. You're not going to get it from your employees. And that's tough because you spend a lot of time with these people and you start to really care about them. Mm-hmm. I struggled with this a lot. I really came to care for the people around me. I wanted to be there. I wanted to help them. I wanted to be friends with them, but they're not my friends. Mm-hmm. And I made that mistake a few times. I stepped over those boundaries. I acted like I would around my buddies. There's an incident that always comes to mind when I think about this, which is I went to a conference and I was playing a video game with another employee, right? We were at a party. We were at an after party for this conference. So I was playing this video game with an employee. We were having a good time and it was fun. And, we're all, having some beers and having a good time, right? And I won the game. And I acted like I would if I was with my buddies, right? I'm like, I'm such a great video game guy. Ha, 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 I beat you, all this stuff. Okay. If I were around my buddies, they wouldn't think twice of that. They'd be like, oh, whatever, Andrew, you're a dork, right? But around my employees, that attitude was fundamentally seen differently. They didn't see goofy Andrew being a buddy. They saw, God, this guy's what a jerk.
Huge jerk.
Domineering dictator, whatever. I'm sure they had lots of fun words for me at that point. And, when I kind of caught wind of this, I was like, oh, man, how could you think? Oh, I was all sad and depressed. But then I did that self-reflection moment, and I'm like, wait a minute. How did they see this? Forget about what I felt or saw. How did they see it? And I'm thinking, you know what? They're kind of right. I was kind of a kind of a jerk at that moment. I mean, it wasn't taken as me being their buddy. And so when I sort of realized that, that's when it occurred to me, there's nothing really wrong with playing the video game with the employee. That was fine, but I should have lost the game.
Yeah.
Or if I won, I should have been very deferential to the employer.
Sure.
Like, oh, hey, good job. Thank you for indulging me in that. That was a lot of fun. I had a good time. I needed to be the boss even then, and I wasn't, and it hurt me. And I made that mistake a lot. And I tell founders all the time, this is a really, while you're thinking about product market fit, and you're thinking about, will the VC like my idea, or you're thinking about, how am I going to get in front of, Google or whatever. The reality is that you're in a relationship with people around you is probably the most critical thing to getting you to the next level and pushing you forward. Because if the people around you don't like you or trust you, they're not going to pour their blood and sweat and tears into your company. They're going to be like, you're a jerk, I don't want to be here. And you're going to lose talented people because you're too focused on your own selfish needs rather than on not only the bigger picture, but how you can make everybody in your company be successful and feel involved and feel part of the of the mission and the goal.
Do you have any recommendations on how folks can, schedule or build a practice where they can do this self-reflection and build that self-awareness? Or is that counseling? Do you just put a slot in the calendar and meditate? What's the trick?
I think it's different for everybody. Everybody, right. Some people, they need to go out into the wilderness and, commune with nature. Some people find that in various spiritual needs. They go to church and they do that. And they, that's where they get that sort of ability to reflect or what have you. How you do it, I don't think is that important. I think there's a lot of ways you can do it. Counselors are great. I think any founder, step one is you need to build a network of personal counselors and advisors, CEO coach, fellow founders who can help you. And it's not that they're necessarily going to have all the answers for you, is that they can basically call you out on your BS, when you bounce an idea off of them. Oh, yeah, I'm thinking about doing this. They can be the ones who say, that's a dumb idea, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Whereas your employees are never going to do that for you. They'll never give you that kind of feedback. So how you get to that point is not as important as that you do it and you have it and you're spending time thinking about your own self-improvement and how you can be a better leader and how you can learn the skills and the traits of leaders. And even if you've been a leader for decades, there's still a lot more to learn. I think that's a lesson that a lot of people who've been successful learn, is that there's so much you don't know. And you never really stop learning how to be a leader. You have to keep trying.
Yeah.
And there's a moment that I had that I think was very meaningful in my own growth as a leader. And that happened in 2019. I was at a conference. And, I had been studying leadership for years at this point, and I had been working on my own leadership moment. But I went to a meeting where I met a man who, truly to this day, I mean, I get tingles even when I think about this meeting with this person. His name's Vincent Stewart. He was head of Cyber Command. He's a Marine, been in the Marines his whole life. He started as a non-com, went all the way up, went to school, became an officer, and went all the way up to brigadier general, I believe it was. General Stewart, I met this man once for a grand total of an hour. And it was one of the most pivotal moments in my entire career, because this was a true leader. This was a man who had what I call executive gravitas. He just, like, everybody innately wanted to follow this man. And I think about that meeting all the time because of how he behaved and who he was and everything he had built. And unfortunately, General Stewart died a few years ago, which is very unfortunate, and he's very missed by those. But I think about that because this was a man who spent this meeting. He was focused on what I wanted. He listened to me. He asked questions about, I felt like as I was talking to him, he genuinely cared about me and my needs and my wants. I didn't sense any sort of from him that it was about him, or we should even praise him. So that was a very telling moment. And when I think to leaders that I look up to, or leaders that after that moment, I'm like, I want to be more like him. And maybe I can never be as great as General Stewart, but I want to be more like Vincent Stewart, because man, he was an incredible man. I'd say that to other leaders out there is think about the people who are role models in your life, and why are they role models? What is it about them that you look up to? Because when you have a role model, whether it's a general my role model was always Captain Kirk. I mean, come on. It doesn't have to be a real person, right? Yeah. And I don't think that's a mystery. I mean, look at the way I talk. I talk like William Shatner half the time, those role models are critical to being a leader, because they give you a framework to communicate what you believe in. And they give you the stories. And even, half my employees could care less about Star Trek, trust me. I'd start talking about, the Wrath of Khan and, the Kobayashi Maru, and they'd be like, oh, God, here goes Andrew again, the stupid Star Trek stuff. They didn't care about Star Trek, but embedded in the story that I kept telling was the lesson that I needed them to hear, and they would hear it, and they'd remember it, whether they wanted to or not sometimes. Like, oh, yeah, we got to do this thing. But those messages became a way that I talked about what I valued. And General Stewart did the exact same thing. He had stories to talk about what he believed in and how he believed in lifting up people and bringing them, and finding ways to find the best in each person around him. And he had stories that went along with that. And I started doing the same thing. It's like I started telling some of those stories of the things that I really valued in my own company. Like I valued that, sort of intelligent discourse. I like it when people are contributing ideas, and we're all sort of throwing ideas in, and we're all sort of spitballing and talking and not just immediately dismissing an idea as crazy. Sometimes the craziest ideas are what lead you to the really good idea. So
yeah. I'm interested in this question because it's something I've had to sort of figure out as we go along. And you talk about scaling a company in your book. So I'm curious, in your opinion, what is the key difference between running a small startup and scaling into a larger operation, and what the challenges are in the middle there?
So there's right now, and I don't know exactly when this is going to air, but right now, as you probably are aware, there's this blog post that's on fire on the startup community called Founder Mode by Paul Graham. It's a really good article, by the way, and everybody should read it because he makes some very good points. But he talks specifically about this issue. What he talks about, and I won't summarize the entire article, but if you've read it, you know that he basically summarizes this idea between founder mode and manager mode, and the notion that startups tend to be run in founder mode when they're small, and then as they start to grow and scale, at some point they have to switch to kind of a manager mode. They have to become more formal. They have to become less sort of seat of their pants. And there's a lot of different debate and arguments about that, about founder mode versus manager mode. And I'm not one of the ones who's going to come out and say, well, founder mode good, manager mode bad, because I don't think that's true. I think there's actually a pretty reasonable statement to say that as a startup scales, you do need to become more formalized. You need to have more processes. You need to have greater accountability and repeatability and consistency. Mm-hmm. That's normal in any business as it grows. The question really becomes as how do you do that, and when do you do that? And what Paul's article really shoots toward is the problem that a lot of investors push the founders to move to that sort of manager mode too soon. And this is where he's absolutely right. This is a big problem when you get a VC in the company. All of a sudden, they want you to become this big company. The problem is that is sort of inherently contrary to what a startup is. Like, when you're a startup, you're innovative, you're creative, you're running things, but you're willing to go, okay, that works, let's do more of it. Mm-hmm. You're willing to jump in and try new things. And it is the uniqueness and the difference and the energy and the chemistry, I guess you could say, of a startup is what makes it special. It's what makes people want to work with a startup. And I often think of Wiz as a great example of this. Wiz is a phenomenal company. I know a lot of people who work there. And I remember when Wiz got started, it was, 3 guys, and they're like, we're going to do cloud security. And now they're worth what now, $20 billion or something?
They turned down the $29 billion. I believe.
$29 billion. There you go. That company is still basically run like the founders still basically run it like it was, it was a $2 million company.
Yeah.
They're still doing a lot of those key things that made them unique and special. And it makes people want to work with them. And it's made them kind of the uniqueness of Wiz was not that they were, here's another cloud security product. It's that they were this innovative, try everything, go after, be bold kind of company. And this is where I think a lot of investors just get things very fundamentally wrong. They're too quick to kind of get the founders out of the picture or shove the founder off into the corner or something like that. And you basically take everything that's unique and special about the company and throw it out the window. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is when you're a startup, you're never going to have the resources, the people, the time, the money that your big competitors have. If you're in the security space like I was, you are never going to have as much money as Palo Alto Networks or Cisco ever. Okay, it's not going to happen. They can throw $20 million at a problem and just burn it, and it's fine. It's like, oh, whatever. They don't
didn't work. Next thing.
Yeah, that didn't work. We can try again. They can throw money and resources and problems. You can't. So, and the challenge is from a customer's perspective, if I'm looking at the market and going, oh, what should I buy? Do I want to buy Cisco, which has been around forever and huge and billion, it's got a massive support infrastructure and yada, 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 and a zillion resellers? It's a known good kind of quantity. Maybe it's not the best product in the world, but it's a known, like the known entity, right? It's that idea of like, nobody got fired from buying IBM, just say it's the PC days. Or do I want to go this, innovative, startup that I'm not really sure they're going to be around tomorrow? The reason people go with startups is because they are different, because they are unique, they are creative, they are special. That's the reason people went with Wiz, for example, 5 years ago or 6 years ago. To get rid of that special uniqueness is got to be one of the worst things you can do to a startup. So my message for founders who are trying to scale their companies is, number one, do not allow investors or board members to talk you into somehow being a founder is a bad thing. And wanting to grow and scale and do new things is somehow wrong. It's not. Okay? Take that transition from founder mode to manager mode slowly. It has to be done almost imperceptibly over time. And most importantly, if you as a founder are not involved moving forward, that is not a good thing. Some of the biggest, greatest companies in the world today have the founders still involved. Mm-hmm. Palo Alto Networks, Nir Zuk is still involved in the company. Nir is a genius. I don't necessarily agree with Nir all the time. In fact, I routinely don't agree with him. But man, if Nir Zuk comes to speak, I am going to go watch him speak because he's a legend. He knows his stuff. The man is very credible. Mm-hmm. And so I don't necessarily love everything Palo Alto Networks does. I don't love a lot of things they do. And I disagree with him a lot. But I got a lot of respect for him because I know Nir Zuk knows his stuff. And for better or worse, that gives them, same thing with Wiz, same thing with a lot of other companies, same thing with, for lack of a better example, Meta. Mm-hmm. Zuckerberg's still involved in the company at this point. So you need to be there and you need to be involved in some capacity and you need to hold the company accountable to its mission and its vision and its purpose for being there. You hold it true to those core values because that's ultimately what is going to make that company special, and that is ultimately what's going to allow you to scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. I always talk about trying to figure out how to scale the things that make us awesome. Because in the early days, you can do a lot of things that don't really scale super well. because you're directly involved in the number of customers and all that stuff. But like, I don't want to lose the stuff that made us special as we grow, right? So,
right. And I've heard it described as sometimes you want to sort of little by little piecemeal and delegate off what you do as a founder until the core thing you're holding on to is the company vision. And that is fundamentally something only a founder can really own. CEOs may be able, hired CEOs or, the well-pedigreed, CEOs you can hire, they can maybe propagate a vision and maybe add to it and be additive, but they can never truly own it like a founder can, because when you have that responsibility of creation, you have that sort of passion and ownership that's really difficult for a hired gun to ever truly possess.
So how can founders avoid the trap of burnout? There's always more work than there is time. Things are on fire all the time. I've struggled with this. I've got the life balance thing in pretty good order now, but especially in like year 2, 3, I was falling apart a little. How can people sort of go into this with some sort of plan to navigate that?
So my CEO coach introduced me to something that's been around for a long time, and it was kind of one of those things that the minute he explained it to me, I was like, duh, why didn't I think of this? The Eisenhower Matrix from President and General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Simple exercise you can do every single day or once a week or what have you that just inherently gives you the division between what's important and what's not. And quite simply, the Eisenhower Matrix is that you essentially take everything you got to do and you plot it on a graph between, what is urgent and what is important. And the idea is that you can very quickly sort of realize that there's the things that are important and urgent, and there's the things that are urgent, but they're not that important. And you just, which ones you can delegate, which ones you can ignore. And as soon as you can do that with some degree of capability, it becomes a lot easier to keep your life and the balance between what you need to do and what can wait for another day, or you can just give it off to somebody else. I will say one thing, and so the Eisenhower Matrix is how I got, control over things. And it also, when I had that, I was able to use it to know, okay, as much as I like doing that, it's just not going to get me where I need to be. For example, I was involved in this, there was this state thing in my state to do cybersecurity, and it was this kind of quasi-governmental board. It was a lot of fun, and I really wanted to help with it. But the reality is it just wasn't that important to my business. And so I had to let it go. I just, as much as I wanted to be involved in it and enjoyed it, it was sapping my time, and I needed to focus on other things. So I found that that's a very practical way to get kind of control over your time and your life. But the next thing I would say is that anybody who preaches to you this hustle culture nonsense, I'm sorry, just ignore them, okay? Because, yeah, you got to work hard sometimes and what have you. And when you're a founder, yeah, you're going to burn, long nights and long days. But number one, you can never expect anybody around you that you hire to share that with you. Yep. They never will, ever, ever, never. So this notion that if you just hustle harder, you'll be successful, whatever.
Yeah.
I just, the whole hustle, like, they're always like, I got up at 4 a.m. and worked out and took a cold shower. And I'm like, good for you. And I'm like, here's the thing. There's plenty of tubby people in warm showers at 9 a.m. who are extremely successful. Okay? Yeah, maybe you've got 1% body fat and you're, get up at 4 a.m. and you're cold. Good for you.
Yeah.
That doesn't make you successful.
Yeah.
Maybe it gives you focus. Maybe it gives you discipline. Those are all great things. But what works for you isn't going to work for everybody, and it's ludicrous to even suggest that it would.
Sure.
The beauty of the Eisenhower Matrix is it's kind of universal and pretty much anybody can use.
Yeah, and I think
it doesn't dictate some weird life choice to you.
Right. I was going to say, I think it also, it's a marathon, not a race, and that's an important thing to remember. Like, you can't defy gravity all the time. Like you said, sometimes you got to put in a long night or two just to make something happen. There's an opportunity, but like you can't build a business on that. That is the one-time moments kind of thing.
You got to grind away at that problem day by day. It's as I always say, the success is imperceptible steps in the right direction. Like every step it's very small, but they start to accumulate on each other over time. And yeah, we all say this and we all know it. There are no quick ways to get to success. It's just a long, sometimes miserable road to get there. But once you get there, it's pretty fun. It's very entertaining. So,
you talked earlier about sort of as companies scale, bringing in leadership and maybe the founders changing their role and stuff. How should founders approach hiring, especially when thinking about those key leadership roles as a company grows?
So I've had this argument with a lot of investors and founders about what do you look for in hires? And I would say there's this very prevailing attitude, certainly in Silicon Valley, but I'm sure it's in other industries as well, where it's like you want to find rock stars. You want to find the people who've been there, done that. I heard that so many times when I was scaling my company. We need to find somebody who's got a good pedigree, who's been there, done that. And I'm like, do we really? Like, do we really want that person? And the reason I say that is because I've hired some of those been there, done that types. They were awful. And the reason they were awful is because they brought all the baggage from their other jobs with them. And they would come into, my company with its innovative and creative ideas and say, well, back at enormous company, we used to do it this way. And I'm like, so what? That was stupid. It was stupid then. It's stupid today. And just because it worked for you in 1999 doesn't mean it works today.
Yeah.
Those well-pedigreed rock stars often come with an incredible amount of baggage and an incredible amount of ego. And so I tell founders all the time, do not hire rock stars. Build them. Create rock stars. Don't hire them. And the way to do that is to hire people who are not quite qualified for the job. I look for the person who is whatever I'm hiring for, whether it's a CFO or a product manager or a project manager or a coder, whatever. I look for a person who, the job is going to be a little bit of a stretch for them. And they're going to have to really kind of step up to this job because, one, I'm handing them an opportunity. And as a startup, the best thing you can do for any employee is give them opportunity. Money, time, whatever. Okay, that's all well and good, and everybody wants that, and I'm not trying to dismiss it. What I'm trying to say, though, is that the one thing you have that Cisco or the giant company doesn't have is opportunity. You can give them a chance to learn, to grow, to become better, to become a rock star. You're never going to be a rock star if you're a drone working at Intel. No offense to Intel. Great company.
Stockholders might disagree right now.
Yeah, shareholders may disagree with me. But, hey, they're having their own job. But that's not an environment to become a rock star. That's the kind of environment where if you want a nice, stable job and you want to go to work every day, and it's that's fine. And that's a legitimate want. Many people want the stability and the normalcy of that big company, and that's a completely legitimate thing. But people, there's a lot of them, they want an opportunity to be a rock star, and you can create that environment for them. And the benefit is if you build your own rock stars, they're going to be loyal to what they've built and what they've created, and they're going to inherently want to protect and defend it. And they're going to want to do that they're going to want to pour their blood and sweat and tears into it. Whereas if you bring in the well-pedigreed know-it-all, he doesn't care or she doesn't care. It's like, whatever. I didn't build this. Somebody else built it. So they're just going to try to slap their own bad ideas. And maybe not all of them are bad, but they're just going to try to take what they did before and repeat it. And that isn't necessarily going to work in a startup. And the last thing I would say about this is another thing where VCs will push you hard to hire these rock stars. And you really need to push back on them. It's not a good idea. I've seen it fail way more than I've seen it succeed.
Good advice. If you could, speaking of advice, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice at the beginning of your career, you got 5 minutes before the time machine beams you back up to the Enterprise or whatever, what would you say to your younger self?
Well, I'd probably tell myself to invest in Intel and Apple and some of the companies I've been maligning, because there's a reason they're huge.
Yeah.
So hopefully that'll make the Intel guy happy with listening to this. What I would tell myself is that I would tell myself something my CEO coach said to me in one of the first meetings I ever said, and it really had a big impact on me personally. And that is, you're worthy of love and support. And I know that feels a little touchy-feely. And there's probably like, well, come on, don't you have some brilliant advice? No, it's the simple notion that you're not alone. There's a lot of other founders like myself. We're out there, and we want to help you. We want to see you succeed. The key thing I've noticed about a lot of founders is they want people to become better and succeed. I do. I mean, and they want to contribute and help, and they don't even really care how much you pay them. I mean, yeah, they want money too, but there's people who will support you. There's people who are there for you. It's not you against the world. And I say that specifically to myself because me personally, I struggled with that. I was a lone founder. I didn't have any co-founders, and that is a very difficult position to be in. And even if you have co-founders can often create some really negative feedback loops to each other. You are all worthy of that love and support. It's out there. There are coaches, there are counselors, there are people who can help you and move ahead. And if I had accepted that much earlier on in my career and had gone out and looked for that help, one, I would have found it was available to me, and two, I probably wouldn't have spent as many years struggling and having to learn lessons the hard way. Mm-hmm. And I would have made a lot fewer mistakes.
That's great advice. And yeah, I think mental health, which I think that's ultimately what that comes down to, is something that's overlooked a lot in our industry and in this founder's journey. You know, it's this idea that you have to be tough and a lone warrior, or however you want to frame it. It doesn't have to be lonely. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
So what's next for you? Do you have a plan for another book or project in the works, or are you just kind of focused in on your two companies right now?
I've got a number of projects in the works. As I mentioned, I'm working on a managed security project. I've been consulting with a managed security provider, helping them come up with a new strategy, of which they've been implementing it, and they've already had success. So that's always very validating. Right. So I'm doing a research project in managed security, and hope to get that out here somewhat soon. Yes, I have another book I'm working on. I've got a couple of books under the works. One of them is all, again, about founders, and kind of going back to that, but in a different way and in a different light. And not so much, what to do, but sort of documenting the many different journeys and experiences that founders have had, because there's a lot of, like I tell the story about General Stewart. I mean, those stories are really valuable, and every founder's got them. And so I'd like to document some of them, because there's a lot you can take away from them. So
very cool.
But I have Zenaciti to run, and I got Screenopolis. We still got articles we got to get up there. I mean, I actually do some of the infrastructure work on some of these sites. In fact, I spent the last 2 days, I've been moving everything in AWS from one to another place. And oh yeah, I just spent like 2 days fighting with all the various like writing access policies in AWS is like,
watching paint dry.
Oh man, is it not fun? And I've had to learn that, and I don't know why, but Nginx, writing an Nginx configuration file is like, that's like I think brain surgery is easier. I could have learned how to become like anyways.
Very cool.
That's what I've been working on, and it's fun. It has, it's always good to get your fingers into the tech and geek out on things.
Yeah, got to keep your brain working, right?
Right.
Okay, so this is the last one I have for you. It's the one I ask of everybody that comes on the show. It can be as wide or as narrow as you want. Do you have any predictions for the future of cybersecurity?
Any predictions? Yes, I have a big one. It's one I've been talking about actually for at least a couple of years now. And I even have a fun name for it. It's Cloud Eats Security. And every year I get validated on this prediction, so I know it's slowly marching toward truth. I believe, and the evidence would continue to support me, that the big cloud vendors, AWS, Azure, GCP, those are the big three, right, are slowly but surely eating the security industry, that all security products and services will come from them. And it's already there in many cases, that many of these standalone security technologies become irrelevant. And I always use the example of web application firewalls. 10 years ago, I mean, there was a bunch of WAF companies. They were all over the place. They were big money. I mean, there's tons of them in the market. Now there are none. And why is that? Because WAF is a checkbox on AWS.
Yeah.
You want a WAF on AWS? Click. And it's like, pick my rule set, done. That's a WAF. And it costs me like 50 cents a month to run that WAF. Like, why would I ever buy a WAF from some other company? Think about email servers. This is another good example. Why would you run your own email server at this point? Office 365 or a Google workspace, you're done.
Yeah.
Why would you buy a spam filter? Because they haven't baked right in. That's happening little by little. The cloud vendors are slowly but surely just consuming these. Microsoft has Defender. Might not be the best endpoint product in the world, but you know what? It's good enough. Does the job. It's pretty good. That thing is happening more and more, and I think within another few years, it's going to get to the point where a lot of these standalone vendors, they have really no place to go. They've already tapped out, and you're already starting to see that happen with some of the big cybersecurity vendors. They're starting to top out. There's nowhere left for them to grow, and they can only grow downward. And there's no reason to go downward because you can't get the unit economics, as we say, don't work out for these big companies. Whereas AWS and Microsoft, it's all just runtime. So that's my grand prediction, that the cloud will slowly but surely just eat all security.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation. I will definitely link your book in the show notes. Is there somewhere people can buy it yet?
Yeah, it's on Amazon.
Okay.
Founder's User Manual. You can also go to my website, andrewplato.com, or Zenaciti, and it's all over the place, and there's links to go buy it. It's on Kindle. And there's even a sample. You can read the first chapter on my website, which the first chapter is really good.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time working on that chapter. So if you don't read the rest of the book, you can at least read the first chapter on my website. But
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Christopher. It's been great, and I really appreciate you having me on today. And I enjoyed the chat as well.
Yeah. Take care. Bye.